attending your son's wedding this weekend, by the way?
He'd like me to go, but it's going to be just a small little private affair, and I'm going to try and make it. I'm in the midst. I said, this is not good timing for me. I have a thing called Iran and other things. That's one I can't win on. If I do attend, I get killed. If I don't attend, I get killed. By the fake news, of course, I'm talking about. No, but he's got a very person who I've known for a long time, and hopefully they're going to have a great marriage.
Welcome to Dead Air, ladies and gentlemen. We start with a humdinger, maybe the best of the week, as we are sitting here on a Saturday trying to comb through the wreckage of shit that nobody talked about that's very important. That's the purpose of this podcast, this Substack Live, brought to you by our friends at the Save America Movement, co-founder of the Save America Movement. Joins me every time we do one of these things. His name is Steve Schmidt. Don't forget to subscribe to the Save America Movement at the Save America Movement right here on Substack. The same thing for my very dear friend, Mr. Steve Schmidt, at Steve Schmidt here on Substack. And let's just start there, Steve. Donald Trump yesterday in the Oval Office, after falling asleep not once but twice. This is I mean, an all-timer. If you wondered if he ever loved his kids, the answer is no. Don Jr.'s getting married this weekend in the Bahamas to his new girlfriend, Annetta Bettina, I think her name is. And this is his third marriage, I believe. But let's not, let's who's counting? And Donald Trump takes a flyer on it saying, and I quote, "I have Iran and quote other things," and then focuses on how you know what, I'd get killed if I went. I'd get killed if I didn't go. So we'll see, but probably not going to go. So really more concerned about how we're going to treat him if he goes to his own son's wedding. And at the end of it says, "Yeah, Don's a person I've known for a long time." It's just
a long time. Beautiful. It's connection to humanity.
It's awesome, isn't it?
Family. Values of the family. Now, technically, Don Jr., he's been engaged 3 times. He's been married twice.
Okay.
And, of course, famously engaged to Kimberly Guilfoyle. This one is a Palm Beach socialite, a social climber, according to Donald Trump, that he was very wary of. So maybe there's some of that. Of course, when Junior was born, Donald objected to him being named Donald Trump Jr., famously asking at the time, but what if he turns out to be a loser, which of course turned out to be the case. And so you have the 2 boys, Uday and Kusei. This is a big day for Uday.
Yeah.
But he won't be there, maybe. Nobody knows. And I can't help but thinking back to Kai Trump at the Republican National Convention talking about her beloved grandpa, Donald there, and, and all the normalcy in the family. No, but it's beautiful.
Internet, yeah. It's really nice. I just want to play it one more time.
Yeah.
If I can. I want to play it one more time, and I want everybody to. His son's getting married. Like you've got his kids.
His mother to just be. His mother is buried on the golf course. Ivana Trump does. She may not. So if you're a little bit younger, you may not remember Ivana and Donald and all the drama, but she's buried on the golf course in New Jersey, laid to rest just off of the first hole. So she won't be at the wedding either. And the wedding won't be at Bedminster. It's going to be in the Bahamas. But it is a deep love that these men feel for one of each other, obviously.
Let's play that clip one more time if we can.
He'd like me to go, but it's going to be just a small little private affair, and I'm going to try and
He'd like me to go.
I'm in the midst. I said, this is not good timing for me. I have a thing called Iran and other things.
That belly
that's one I can't win on. If I do attend, I get killed. If I don't attend, I get killed. By the fake news, of course, I'm talking about. No, but he's got a
Someone I've known for a long time.
person who I've known for a long time, and hopefully they're gonna have a great marriage.
The navel too. I mean, yeah, the guy in the golf shirt. He's wearing like something that he picked up at Sam's Club on the rack on the way out, and he's wearing this tight golf shirt. And he's got this amazing Audi navel that has taken the internet by storm.
Very close to the president's head. Very close.
What a time to be alive, Steve.
Incredible week.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Week of
Insanity again. We're here to cover a bunch of it. Anyway, we've got a couple of things to get to. We've got some guests to get to today as part of Dead Air, where we're going to cover some things nobody's covering. And there are a couple of things that are really, really important, including the attempted takeover of Christian nationalists who completely misrepresent the fate of Christians around the United States of America and North America. We've got a great guy named Brian Recker who's going to join us today. He's a former pastor. I deconstructed his faith, and we're going to talk a little bit about that crazy, I call it a cult movement on the mall last weekend, which was Jubilee 250. Steve, I know you and I have deep interest in making sure people understand what that is. And of course, you know, what's a Trump regime administration? What's a Trump presidency without a burdening pandemic? And Ebola is now top of mind for a lot of people. And yeah, Chief Science Officer, Chief Duty Officer, Mrs. Science on the Save America Steering Committee, Angie Rasmussen. Dr. Angie Rasmussen is going to join us. She's perfect for this. She's a world-renowned virologist and infectious disease expert. So we're gonna round the horn a couple of times here today. We'll get to Brian in just a second. I want to ask you about one thing that happened that I saw this weekend. Andrew Ross Sorkin and the Bezos interview on Squawk Box. Did you see the entire Bezos interview this weekend?
I did. I saw it.
And what's that? You didn't like it?
I didn't like it.
Well, I'm going to play a couple of things because
my first impression was like how rarely you hear his voice these days, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I forgot how whiny it is, how high pitched, how aggrieved. So let me respond to what he says, because I think he's focused on the wrong question, which is a dumb one, but dare me to say that anything that could come out of the mouth of a billionaire, let alone the wealthiest billionaire of all the billionaires, be dumb.
Well, it is. Let's play the clip. We've got a couple to play for you today. I sat down with Andrew Ross Sorkin and literally tried to shield himself as a populist, his wealth as a populist, and tried to tell everybody that his billions in taxes, his being one of the richest guys in the world, it's not going to fix anything. And then he tried to sell that to a country that's going hungry, a country that doesn't have Medicaid, a country that's paying $6 a gallon for gas. And I want to play the clip, and then I want your thoughts because, listen, Jeff Bezos probably a smart guy. This might be some of the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Let's play the clip if we can.
A nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year pays more than $12,000 a year in taxes. Does that really make sense? So people talk about, making the tax system more progressive. How about we start by having the nurse in Queens not pay taxes? Why is a nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year paying more than $1,000 a month in taxes? That's $1,000 a month that could help with rent or groceries or anything. And so, and by the way, do you know what that all adds up to? The bottom half of income earners in this country pay only 3% of the taxes. It's only 3%. We can find 3%. So we don't have, it's a small amount of money for the government, that. And really, and the more I thought about it, to me, it's kind of absurd that we're doing this. We shouldn't be asking this nurse in Queens to send money to Washington. They should be sending her an apology.
Yeah, now he's suddenly concerned with nurses and teachers in Queens. Steve, your thoughts?
I think about when they have these gatherings of the billionaires and they get together to discuss the problems of the world at some resort. You know, if I ever got trapped with that guy, I would swim across whatever body of water was necessary to get away from that thing. Right? It's just brutal listening to him.
Yeah.
And the first question really is not why the nurse who makes $75,000 in Queens pays $12,000 a year in taxes. It's why a nurse in Queens makes $75,000 a year.
Mm.
Not a living wage in Queens
Mhm.
for a professional degree. As he sits there at the head of an empire that dehumanizes its employees to the degree they can't properly use a bathroom, lest they be penalized. And this is documented across the horizon. No, Jeff Bezos is somebody who, as you can see, has the disposition that, well, you know, this just occurred to me. You know, I've been reflecting on this, right? And his arrogance exudes, right? It's out of every pore of his body. You can just see him sitting on the back of his $500 million boat with Lauren Sanchez discussing the plight of the nurse in Queens. And what Bezos is okay with when he talks about the bottom half of the country by income distribution paying 3% of the taxes is basically a nation of serfs.
Mhm.
47% of the country doesn't have $400 available for an emergency. And that is a foremost threat to the stability of the republic as we see playing out.
Mhm.
The point of our politics, and specifically the economics that are part of our politics, aspirationally, are not to save the $75,000 a year nurse $12,000, but to figure out how to rebuild the middle class of the country that used to include nurses.
Mhm.
When people could go work with dignity and purpose. We need nurses. And that will be clear as we talk about Ebola in this next segment with one of our favorites, Dr. Angie Rasmussen. But it used to be the case, and there's a lot of people, including some in the resistance movement, including on their podcasts, have lamented why there's not 40 million people in the streets, which I think is a very stupid lament. And the answer to the question is because people are struggling to get by. And life is hard. And it's not 1967 anymore. But that doesn't mean, nor should it be confused with, a deep anger in the public about the obscenity of what's going on in the country by way of corruption, by way of capitulation, and all of it's going to be swept out in this coming election. But what you see in Jeff Bezos is a guy who destroyed the integrity of the Washington Post, broke his word to the Graham family. His displays of wealth are positively vulgarian, vulgar, vulgar. And he wants to give a lecture sitting in his factory with a rocket in the background.
Takes millionaire buddies to space.
Please.
Yeah.
And the question isn't, you know, and I could talk for hours about this, but I'll spare everyone today, right? The issue is how much revenue does the government need to function?
Mhm.
And what's required to fund it? And we have an enormous societal problem because now we're $40 trillion in debt, and we put that on our kids and our grandkids. And $1 trillion a lot. You know, as I've said before on the show, you know, 1 million seconds from now, that's 12 days from now. Billion seconds, that's 32 years. Trillion, that's 32,000 years from now. That's the difference between a billion and a trillion.
Mm.
A lot.
Yeah.
Big
Yeah.
number.
Well, and we can't do that math, which is why I found it really interesting when he decided that he was going to start advocating for teachers and nurses. To your point, aside from the vulgarity of his Italian wedding, where he bought a whole town, aside from his $500 million super yacht, and let's not forget about his $75 million support yacht for that super yacht. Aside from the fact that Donald Trump's great big bill or big beautiful shitty bill, whatever he wants to call it, precludes him from paying taxes on any of that stuff. You can write it all off now. It's part of the deal, right? So vulgarian is a tremendous word, but strategically, obviously, the heat that is on a guy like Bezos and what he's done to his employees, not allowing them bathroom breaks, paying them as little as possible, now getting ready to probably lay off his entire workforce in favor of robots and drones and automated vehicles. But I want to ask you about one thing, and that did we just watch sort of that new billionaire playbook? Did we just watch that new strategy, which is like, hey, guys, don't put it on me. I'm advocating for you. I'm a populist. I'm your friend. But because I want to know that answer, and I also want to talk a little bit, or for you to talk a little bit about not just that populist strategy that he seems to be employing, but words are cheap. I don't see his name on any fucking hospitals. I don't know what his giving tree looks like. I don't see any massive donations like we used to see from the Buffetts or the Gates. The proof is not in the fucking pudding.
I remember when there were very few billionaires. And when you thought of someone who was a billionaire, Ted Turner was a billionaire, and Ted Turner was cool, right? And entrepreneurially, someone who comes from nothing and figures out how to make $1 billion, an Oprah, a Michael Jordan. There is a strain, and always has been, amongst the left of the Democratic Party that's hostile toward success, right? And I think that's a mistake. And I don't think that's where the country ever has been. I don't think people look at somebody who's fantastically wealthy with envy, because generally speaking, it's not material to their lives. What's material is the unfairness,
right,
and the corruption of it all. And we've seen these people try to step up and out of their wealth into our private lives, into the public sphere, with domination as their intent. Right? And all of that is what associates this moment to the Gilded Age. And so anytime you have a company, say a Walmart, right, or a Amazon, or any company where any percentage of its workforce is required to be on public assistance of any type or form for their health care, for food, what that means is the shareholder is being subsidized by the taxpayer. And I don't want my tax dollars going to subsidize shareholders who purchase the politicians with corrupt transactions. Jeff Bezos could do enormous good in the world. He chooses not to. That's his right. But spare me the lecture. And his presence, again, it's vulgar. One of the great journalistic embarrassments of the year is the New York Times story talking about his wife's happiness. She's, quote, according to Lauren Sanchez Bezos, she's 200% happier than the normal person. Like Marie Antoinette.
Yep.
In the digital age. And the lament of the billionaire as victim is a pitiful cry. and the politics of it all is one, I think, in the coming years where there's not going to be a lot of sympathy for the Jeff Bezos position. We had a broken society because the nurse in Queens is making $75,000 a year and can't possibly afford to live in New York City and raise a family and go to the PTA meeting and be involved in the fundraising for the new playground or the new gym or the new whatever, let alone be involved with the scout troop or whatever. And that's what's broken.
Mm.
It's not about, whomever concocted the argument. The last thing I'll say is, and I'll say this to somebody who, for a long time advised politicians, right, at a presidential level, vice presidential, prime minister, right, very highest level, senators, CEOs, right, have been on television myself for many, many, many years, right? He's terrible at being on television. If I was sitting there watching, right, the guy who prepared him for that's got to lie to him after the interview and tell him, well, you did a good job, right? Like everybody who knows anything about, right, projecting a message, communicating, right, he's fucking awful, bad, failed, bad at it. His voice sucks. His body mannerisms, every aspect about it. And the logic, which no doubt he's convinced himself is genius, is sophomoric.
Mm.
Right? It's not complexity distilled to an understandable bite. It's moronism expressed as theology by the fourth richest person in the world who's completely detached from both normalcy and day-to-day reality.
Mm.
And the interview sucked too. Right? The interview sucked too. Right? It wasn't challenged at any level.
Yeah.
It's just like we should bring Angie Rasmussen on to talk about a lesser virulence, the Ebola virus.
We will coming up at the end of the show.
Can I just say this about the Ebola virus? Like the Ebola virus always scared the shit out of me. Remember those movies?
Yeah.
The genre, the Outbreak.
28 days later. Yeah.
Like Gwyneth Paltrow is banging that guy on the business trip. She comes home.
Gets
right?
real sick. Everybody starts
Like,
dying. Yeah.
bleeding out of her eyes, right? But the husband's immune, and right, it's unbelievable. That's the Ebola virus, and it's always freaked me out. And so now that there's an Ebola virus outbreak on the heels of the hantavirus outbreak, and that's a beautiful virus too. Beautiful virus, as they say. HHS, very beautiful virus.
Yeah.
This hantavirus. Then we got Robert Kennedy there. We have a ship of fools, and we got some Ebola virus breaking out. So
great timing.
Got Jeff Bezos is his own type of Ebola.
That lack of empathy is its own virus, right? And that's what makes me laugh about the turn to populism. Like and we'll get to Angie, and your fears are well warranted, by the way. Ebola, bad. I've confirmed that. Ebola is no good. But to your point, that lack of empathy is a virus. And when you don't see the authenticity behind someone's words, and you haven't ever seen or heard those words from Jeff Bezos, he's full of shit. People who are authentic, they show up. They put their money where their mouth is. The Warren Buffetts of the world. They say, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to put my money where their mouth is. And that empathy that we talk about exists in very few places. And as an aside, as a complete aside, and the complete opposite, the juxtaposition to that incredible lamentation of a billionaire's victimhood, we were in New York this week at the Epstein filibuster, epsteinfilibuster.com. And I went there with Ellie and spent the day. Ellie Leonard, just tremendous writer, maybe one of the world's foremost experts on what is actually in these Epstein files. And if anybody hasn't seen it, I'm going to play a quick video here. And we're gonna introduce our next guest who went there, and we're gonna tie that in to the extreme lack of empathy, that disease of Christian nationalism, in just a second. And it all ties together in a nice little bow, and I'll tell you how in just a second, and we'll meet Brian. But I want to play this clip that the Save America movement has put together. And everybody, please go and subscribe to the Save America movement, of this incredible installation of the Trump Epstein Reading Room in Tribeca, New York City this weekend. And I wasn't just moved. I was moved to the point where it took my breath away when I was there. We're going to play a couple of clips. Some of the people had read, but you can get a real feel for what real empathy looks like. People who do not abate their responsibility of the reality that they live on a day-to-day, who are literally at war for these victims, for decency, for the United States of America. If we could play that clip one time, that'd be great.
There are 4,000 of these. They're 800 pages apiece. They are heavily redacted. Every single one is evidence of something that happened to a woman, to a girl, to a child.
I cannot even begin to imagine the pain these young women have carried. Not just the pain of what happened to them then, but the pain of having to fight again and again just to be believed, just to be heard, just to be treated like their lives matter.
Nearly 1,400 survivors spoke the truth, and the national media, the Department of Justice, and this administration have failed them.
Everyone has the responsibility, when the rest of the system isn't working, to step up.
Do the investigation to hold people accountable. Transparency is one step, justice is another.
No conflict or stock trade or war should supersede this.
I'm just sorry, this is hard for me just because I'm just thinking my sister, sorry.
I also wanted to be here today because I'm a survivor myself. I was raped in college and it ruined my life to the point where I changed colleges, and this is something that I never saw justice. I will never see justice, and hopefully I can take part in something that will bring a little bit of justice to the survivors today.
I listened to the survivors explain how the pain does not stop when the abuse ends. The pain continues when the government mishandles your name. The pain continues when your story is treated like paperwork. The pain continues when the Department of Justice makes decisions without thinking about the human beings behind those files. For every file that has been released, just think about how many more files they are hiding and protecting.
Transparency and accountability are critical to delivering justice to Epstein's victims.
The Epstein Files Transparency Act, passed by Congress and signed by the President of the United States, specifically states that no record can be delayed or redacted based on embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity, specifically noting that it cannot be applied to any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. The President of the United States and the Justice Department have failed to live up to that promise.
To everybody who is listening, to everyone who is paying attention, what they are counting on is that you'll stop paying attention.
They were counting on people moving out. They were counting on the news cycle changing. They were counting on survivors being exhausted. They were counting on the shame, the fear, the silence, and time. But almost a year later, we are still here.
We have a problem, and I think the only way we're gonna solve it is to get some sunlight on it.
We all have to face this ugliness head on. We can't bury our heads in the sand about what these files say and who they implicate.
Yeah, so just incredibly moving. And I was so grateful to be there with everybody this weekend. There were so many people that were there. And joining us is one of those people. And we got a couple things to talk about with him. He's a former pastor. His name's Brian Recker. He's a public theologian, writer, former evangelical pastor. So he fits into the mix here because he knows where everything is and he knows what's going on and he knows what America is trying to wrap itself in which is suicidal in so many ways where there is no empathy, which, you know, if you understand anything about the Bible, very Christ-like, he teaches empathy, teaches love, teaches forgiveness, teaches hope. And when I found out Brian was on the show, going to be on the show, I was really excited because he stands out in so many different ways, and I want to welcome him to the show right now. Brian Recker, how you doing, buddy? You all right?
Hey, I'm really good, Dean. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, dude, absolute pleasure. You read at the Trump Epstein reading room. Your thoughts, real quick.
Yeah, I did have the honor of seeing that room. It was powerful, an incredible display of solidarity with the victims and the survivors. And honestly, I was struck. I even just love the way they titled it, the Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein Memorial Reading Room, because Trump loves to put his name on everything, and that's his legacy. And he's doing everything he can right now, as you've pointed out, to get us to be distracted from that, pulling out the stops from a war in Iran to a massive display of religious devotion, even as if that could distract us from this abuse. But I know that's not, it wouldn't work for God. God's eyes are on the vulnerable and on the victims. And I think that's where our eyes need to be. And that's where he will ultimately be remembered. I don't think it's going to work. We are not forgetting. We are not shutting up. And so if the least I could do was go and read, and it was a very moving experience.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And thanks for your support. Thanks for your help. I mean, this is leaning into a whole bunch of different aspects of MAGA, what America is, what represents the regime. You mentioned this prayer thing on the National Mall. Steve and I, and Steve, please feel free to quip in and take over. I prefer it if you do. But, you know, we talk a lot about the misrepresentation of Christian nationalism and that extreme lack of empathy. And that lack of empathy is not something that, you know, and I grew up in the faith. I grew up in the church. I'm apostate, so I've walked away from all of it completely. I wouldn't call myself an atheist. I'd call myself agnostic, because my understanding of what that faith was extreme empathy in every situation, helping people who needed it the most, helping the marginalized the most, sticking up for people, feeding people, all the things that we were taught the church was. But this regime's managed to wrap itself in that Christian nationalist, Christian faith, this ideology that I had understood to be very different. In my mind, Jesus would have been the guy that shows up to the Epstein Trump Memorial Reading Room, and he would have taken all 24 hours of himself to do it. You know, that's the philosopher Christ that I am aware of. But let's set that aside, because this last weekend, the Jubilee 250 National Prayer Breakfast, which, you know, pardon my language, was the weirdest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. And Steve and I talked about it last weekend. It's this idea that they're going to rededicate the United States of America to Christian nationalists, for Christian nationalists, as one nation under God, run by Christian nationalist rules, laws, policies, etc. And you know, if you understand anything about Christian nationalism, their goal is to do away with the laws of man and subject everybody on earth to the laws of their God as they interpret it. So would love your thoughts, and then we can kind of start moving from there.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts, but one of them is, as you mentioned, this is not an accurate reflection of the spirituality of Jesus. It is, however, a very common way that the Christian religion has been used. It's not the only way. There are many incredible Christians that are living out the kind of empathy that you described. But the reality is that fear-based, high-control religion has always been a powerful tool in the hands of authoritarians. They love it. They love that they can not only say, you know, straight people are above queer people, men are above women, but they can also say that that's God's way that things are. They can say not only that I have uncontested power, but that God wants me to have that power. Not just that this is a will that I want to enforce on the country and on the world, but that this is God's will that's going to be enforced on the country and the world. And so it is a useful tool. gospel, we have to resist it all the more, because that's not what real spirituality is. Spirituality, the purpose of it is not to overlook the suffering of the vulnerable and hold up hierarchies of oppression. It should actually cause us to knit our hearts together with those who are being oppressed and fight for collective liberation. That's what true spirituality should do.
That's what I thought it was. Steve?
I mean, I would love to see more of it, to be honest. Instead, what we often have seen in our country is a particular version of Christianity that uses Jesus instead of following him. They use him to baptize, all kinds of things. And this isn't new. I mean, if you just look back, Frederick Douglass has a famous quote that I return to again and again, where he said that between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. He said, I love the pure, peaceable Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, woman-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. And yet today, they're calling back to the Christianity that he was denouncing then and saying, we need to return to that. We need to rededicate America as a Christian nation. But at what point was it Christian? Because Frederick Douglass was calling out that version of Christianity as slave-holding. That was the kind of Christianity that we had then. And it really isn't that much different now in the public square. And so when they're trying to push this on people, the people who are saying, for example, we need to put the 10 Commandments up in schools, but not trying to get guns out of schools, I think they're missing the point of what spirituality is supposed to do.
What is that? You know, for a lack of a better term, because there's a lot of nuance here when you talk about Christians. I think there's something like 40,000 denominations of Christianity that are currently practiced around the world in different sects and different denominations, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you explain this kind of Christian nationalism?
Well, I mean, it's as American as apple pie. It's also, like I said, not even particularly attached to just America. I mean, Nazi Germany was 95% Christian. Apartheid South Africa was 95% Christian. The Jim Crow South was 95% Christian. So Christianity can be used to absolutely, but not only baptize bigotry, but entrench these hierarchies. But any religion can, especially when it becomes less about the positive benefits of spiritual connection that you receive, which is what Jesus talked about, and more about believing the right thing so that you can go to heaven when you die instead of hell. When it really becomes about being in an in-group, when you have a religion that is essentially about creating in-groups and out-groups, then it becomes pretty easy to kind of reflect that as a spirituality where you're constantly creating outsiders. You have a religion that's actually creating communities to be looked down upon. And it actually reduces your empathy instead of increasing it. For me, spirituality should remind me that I'm a part of one human family. I loved actually what the reflections of some of the Artemis II crew members when they went to space. They came back and they all described having incredibly spiritual experiences. And that didn't look like them saying, man, we need to get back down there and make sure that everybody converts to the right religion. No, it looked like them saying, we are a part of a really special thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Our earth is a special thing. And what are we doing? Why are we tearing each other apart? And by the way, that's in the Bible. The Bible talks about the fact that the earth is the Lord's. God isn't a God of one people. Any God that's my God and not your God is an idol and a tool of the ego. God knits our hearts together and reminds us that we're all a part of one thing. And that's why the prophets talked about that day where we'll beat our swords into plowshares. And we're supposed to be trying to build that world right now. That's the message, not to wait for God to do it in heaven when we die. And unfortunately, a lot of fear-based versions of spirituality, they are really just used. I mean, nobody loves an afterlife-focused, fear-based religion more than corrupt politicians, authoritarians, and billionaires. Because they'll say, hey, yes, you focus on the afterlife. You focus on getting people out of hell and into heaven. We're going to go ahead and handle this world. We're going to take it from here. We're going to hoard wealth. We're going to shape this planet in our image. And I don't want to give that up. I think spirituality should knit us together to our neighbors. And I do believe that Christianity at its best can still do that.
Yeah, it depends on the ideology and it depends on the interpretation. It depends on what church you go to. Depends on the denomination. But you used to be a fundamentalist pastor, right? You come from a fundamentalist background.
I was raised in fundamentalism, and I kind of had my first deconstruction where I left fundamentalism have entered a more mainstream evangelicalism. And then with the rise of Donald Trump, that woke me up to some of what was going on in evangelicalism as well. And now I would not consider myself an evangelical at all, but I still call myself a Christian because I don't want the people with some of the worst opinions being the only ones representing Jesus in the public square. I'm still a Jesus guy. Most of the people who leave Christianity or leave evangelicalism, it's not because of Jesus. They're not like, whoa, I looked into it and actually a pretty bad actor. No, it's usually because they looked into it and they realized that the thing they're a part of is not actually reflecting the spirituality of Jesus. So I still want more Jesus, not less. And when I look at that 250 rededication, I don't see a lot of Jesus. I see the kind of thing that makes God want to throw up. And by the way,
like what?
The Bible.
yeah. If you're lukewarm, I will spew you from my mouth, right?
Well, in Amos, God says, I despise your religious festivals. Away with the noise of your songs. They played a lot of songs there. Chris Tomlin sang a whole bunch of worship songs. God says, turn off the music. He says, let justice roll on like a river and righteousness like a never falling stream. So any spirituality that doesn't result in justice, in solidarity with the vulnerable, it really is just a tool of the ego to create superiority complexes.
Let me jump in and suggest that we bring in Dr. Angie Rasmussen because we're going to talk about what I think is a profound evil, and that's the cessation of so much USAID funding and US aid all around the world. And we're going to talk about the Ebola virus. And I want to tie in something that Brian said. And so bring in Angie, and I'll just talk, and Angie can hear what we're talking about, and then jump into the conversation. But this Artemis 2 mission, these astronauts, the four of them saw something that American astronauts haven't seen in more than 50 years, and that is the view of the Earthrise from the backside of the moon. And the first time that human beings ever saw the Earth in its whole against the blackness of space was in 1968 on the Apollo 8 mission. And on that occasion, the astronauts on Christmas Eve read to the population of the Earth as that grainy black and white image of the Earth seen for the first time came into view. They read from the book of Genesis. If you think about technology and you think about progress, the Webb telescope, which was launched into space, is a miracle, a time machine that allows us to see back literally to the moments immediately after the creation, to the beginning of time. And it's commensurate to a period of time where we reach the apogee of our scientific power. And then in an act of national suicide or self-harm or vandalism, arson, however you wish to think about it, we plunder our public health services. We annihilate our scientific capabilities. We degrade the scientist. We mock the researcher. We become skeptical of evidence in favor of superstition, and we call it faith in the name of Trump. And it is a disease that is crippling the American Republic. And so let's bring these two conversations together with Brian and Angie, if we can, and bring Angie into the conversation.
Hello, Ange. Okay.
We're going to build a screen for 4 people. We're going to keep.
It's okay. They'll edit this part out.
We don't know how to do any of this. We got a great team. I also want to say what we're rating for Angie and on the reading, the Save America movement, the SaveAmericaMovement.org is that Eliza Orland's a lot of people follow. She's a great voice on Substack, and Eliza had the idea of reading from those files in a 24-hour filibuster in the aftermath of the national media, all of them, ABC News, CBS News, NBC News, MS Now, everybody ignoring the congressional hearings in West Palm Beach held by the Democrats, highlighting the testimony of the Epstein survivors. And what the Save America movement did is take Eliza's wonderful idea, working with our partners at that Donald Trump Epstein reading room, and all of a sudden, a whole bunch of volunteers is bring everybody together and refocus attention on something that's not going away. And what's not going away is the thousands of abuse victims whose innocence was abused by power, whose innocence was further abused by a cover-up, and whose justice system, our justice system, has been debased by that cover-up. And it's zero sum. We can't prevail in the fight to save democracy, to make sure the republic endures, and allow what has happened here to go forward with no accountability. The die is cast. It's the abuser or the abused. You have to pick a side. Like, justice must be done here. The law is clear. Todd Blanche has no damn right to do what he's doing. And we're not getting off the issue. And we're going to have elections. And this issue is going to be a decisive one in that election. It's going to help bring down the whole rotten enterprise.
Well said, dude. Well said. Appreciate it. There she is, Dr. Angela Rasmussen. Hello, ma'am. Quite the intro from Mr. Steve Schmidt. And as I understand it, you're now the official science officer. Are you officer first class, second class? What are you? What are we doing?
Something like that. Science captain. I think science chair is my title now.
Okay, science chair for the Save America movement. Ange, great to see you. Brian, again, thank you for being here again. Brian Recker, he's an author, former pastor, and we just had an incredible conversation with him. Steve did an incredible job linking both of these, subjects together, where it becomes, absurd, where you see the experts being shined, you see science being turned away from, and the celestial spirituality, which we're going to talk about. It's truly remarkable what they've been able to do, to Steve's point. Now we're sitting on some kind of Ebola virus outbreak. Huh?
Yeah, it is an Ebola virus outbreak. I mean, it's not Ebola virus, the OG Ebola virus that everybody's familiar with, but there's actually 6 of these different kinds of viruses, and this is another one of those kinds of viruses. So it's still Ebola. It's called Bundabugia virus, but it's an Ebola virus for all intents and purposes, and that's what people need to know about it. Is it going to cause a pandemic? Probably not. We know how these viruses are transmitted. The whole reason that this is turning into a giant public health disaster is essentially the U.S. has completely withdrawn their funding from USAID, which has completely hampered this outbreak response. CDC is not functional. They previously would have been leading some of these responses because they have deep expertise, and we've withdrawn from the World Health Organization. And this is exactly germane to what you guys were just talking about, because previously we actually felt that it was a moral obligation to show leadership in this area, and we thought that it was bad if people started dying of a truly horrible disease, even if Americans weren't primarily dying from it, because we understood that this is a global world. And one way that America has historically shown a lot of leadership is by gaining expertise in these areas, because we're the first ones to go out and respond. We've basically not only decided not to respond, we've completely removed our capability to do so, and we've stripped funding from these areas of the world where we were actually doing quite a lot of good and saving quite a lot of lives. And so as a result, people are going to die just because our current government is like, we don't care. And to me, that is immoral, and that is antithetical to American values.
So, Brian, I think it's more than immoral. I think it's a form of evil, of profound indifference, and some score of hundreds of thousands of human beings, maybe millions of human beings will die over the course of 4 years because America has turned off the spigot to the aid programs. And I'll let Angie adjudicate the actual numbers of projected human beings who will pass away. I want to associate myself with what you said historically as being spot on, is the theology that we see present at this Jubilee on the National Mall. This is the theology of the slaveholder. This is the theology of Jim Crow. This is the theology of the supremacist and the segregationist, of Robert Lee, of Stonewall Jackson, of Alexander Stevens, of the Cornerstone speech that breathed life into the Confederacy. That's what it is. It's virulent. It is as American as apple pie, and it has endured, and it is oppositional to the teachings of Jesus Christ, to the compassion of Jesus Christ. And these two forces stand in opposition to one another. And in this moment in time, right, the United States is the most generous nation on the face of the earth. That hasn't changed. But a tolerance for a spirit of cruelty has descended on a land being driven by people who call themselves God's messengers, whose proposition is not only are we here to tell you something is so on a political point of view, but we're here to remind you that when we tell it to you, it's God's words. And so we have a faith component in this organization. The Reverend William Barber, we have ministers all over the country that are involved. But how do you explain to people of faith, but also people who are skeptical, how do you talk to them about the danger presented by politicians proclaiming the word of God as the inspiration for their venomous message? What is it that we're seeing while millions of the world's poorest and most vulnerable are being stricken by preventable diseases and dying of starvation, when the people that are the cause of that are the people tweeting Bible scriptures like Marco Rubio?
It is really tragic. And, you know, what's really hard for me is I was raised in fundamentalism and spent time in evangelicalism. And in those movements, people were not against U.S. aid to foreign nations. That was not something we were proud of, being the kind of country that did those things. Christians don't tend to be against doing those sorts of things. Watching, rather than the white American evangelicals that were the primary voting bloc that got Trump in office, 87% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, and they really did buoy his entire campaign. Watching, instead of them being a conscience to the administration and challenging the state on these egregious actions that defy the moral law, much less just straight up Bible verses, instead of challenging them on that, what I'm actually seeing is many Christians be changed and their consciences be softened in order to go along with the administration. And a lot of that just seems to be an exchange for power. A few weeks ago at CPAC, Franklin Graham, in a speech, talked about the Merry Christmas versus Happy Holidays thing, which is such a goofy cliche. And if you're not in evangelicalism, you can scratch your head and say, why do they care so much whether a Starbucks cup says Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays on it? And what it has to do with is cultural supremacy, that Christians have been on the top for so long. And there is a sense of I would call it Christian supremacy. We talk a lot about white supremacy, but the reality is that even historically, Christian supremacy predates white supremacy. And this need that everybody be Christian, everybody look like us, and that we run the culture with Christianity, that has slipped away. We live in a pluralistic society now, and that is really scary to a lot of Christians. And so Trump, although he has presented all of these moral problems that seem so obviously bad, what he has offered white evangelicals is cultural dominance. He says, I'm going to put you in the center again. We're going to say Merry Christmas again and not Happy Holidays. And they have sold their soul to receive that cultural power. So overlooking things like, well, massive sex abuse cover-ups, the Epstein files, the reduction of U.S. aid, which is leading to the deaths of millions of children, all so that they can get this cultural priority again, that they can have these 250-year celebrations and that sort of thing. Now, I think that a standard sort of in the pew Christian, when presented with some of that stuff, isn't necessarily going to go along with all of it. But the leaders are eager for that kind of prominence. And I think what often gets theologized is they'll say, well, we need to be superior. We need to be at the center of culture because these are heaven and hell issues. And if Christianity is not powerful and prominent, then people won't receive the one message that leads to heaven because every other way leads to hell. So they begin to spiritualize and spiritually bypass these real material issues of life and death and justice in this world, and instead put it off to the next world. So I think telling stories, to answer your original question of how can we get people to see, is getting these stories in front of people. Unfortunately, we live in a world where billionaires have controlled media ecosystems, and people are being presented with curated sets of information that are not getting them some of these stories. And so they aren't hearing about the millions of deaths due to these cuts in U.S. aid. And if they were, maybe they would feel something about it and their conscience would be pricked. So I think these conversations are really important. And having conversations, being bold to speak up to neighbors and coworkers and friends. Have you heard that those reductions have led to these deaths? I think people need to be having more of these conversations with their neighbors.
You know, I can agree more with that, Brian, because what I have observed in this Ebola outbreak so far, which feels like it's been months and it's been like a week, is that people are worried primarily about whether they're going to get Ebola. Or is it going to come here? Is it going to be in the US? Are we going to have an Ebola outbreak? And the answer is no. And it makes it really, really challenging to convince people that this is still something that you really need to worry about. It's still something that's going to materially affect your life, but you have to actually care that a bunch of people in Central Africa are going to die in the middle of a conflict zone, and that this is making a bad situation worse because of this. Now, that is extremely difficult to explain, and I've had this problem as well trying to explain the impact of vaccine policy changes. Because, yeah, a lot of people are going to die. However, that's going to happen over a period of time. It's not necessarily going to be the most visible, and it's not going to affect people in their daily lives until the problem gets so bad that nobody can avoid it. And by that time, it will be completely too late to do anything about it. Coming back to the Christianity thing, I mean, this is something that is directly relevant to this Ebola outbreak. So there was an American doctor who tested positive for Ebola. America invested millions, multiple millions, hundreds of millions of dollars building these biocontainment facilities, and they evacuated doctors from West Africa during that epidemic and saved all of their lives. Not a single person who was evacuated from West Africa died of Ebola because they got such excellent care. There was also no onward transmission because we built these facilities to prevent an Ebola epidemic from happening if we had to do that. The American doctor in this case who tested positive, and his wife is also a physician who had a separate high-risk exposure when giving an ultrasound to a pregnant patient who turned out to have Ebola, and is now quarantining with their 4 small children. They were not allowed to come back to the U.S. because the White House did not want them to come into the country and be able to take advantage of all these resources that we've invested our taxpayer money in. So we can't even bring American citizens home. And get this, they were with a medical missionary organization, a Christian missionary organization that intended to provide health care in the absence of U.S. aid, to people who desperately need it. They were there actually living their faith beliefs and providing medical care to these people. And our country's thanks to them is to say, ew, gross, Ebola, we don't want you, go to Germany instead. You can't come back home.
So I was going to ask you, Angie, as a scientist, how do you think about this issue through this moral plane? So if I could roll your career backwards, I imagine that you would have been surprised if I told you you were headed for a major leadership role in a national political organization and that you would be a pretty prominent spokesperson in an age of anti-science madness and ascendancy. And though when you think about and talk about all of this, at the end, the outcome, right, is the human being, the human life, and the dignity of that human being and that human life that will die under the most miserable conditions and the most miserable circumstances imaginable for no reason whatsoever other than a performative cruelty unleashed to titillate the sensibilities of a cable news audience that watches something called Fox News or Newsmax or OAN. And I just wonder if you've had an evolution about how you think about these things as moral issues beyond the scientific realm that you're so expert at.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I think about these days. And certainly, if you go back to the West Africa Ebola epidemic, right? As a scientist, that sort of made my career. One of the things that I did scientifically is I developed a model of Ebola pathogenesis. That's the process by which Ebola virus causes disease in mice that showed that basically you could give a bunch of genetically different mice the same dose of Ebola virus. Some of them would live, some of them would die, and some of them would die with what looked a lot like the human Ebola virus disease with all the hemorrhagic complications. This was rejected by all of the top journals. They thought, great paper, but who cares? And then the West African epidemic happened and they all came back to me. And so it ended up being published in Science. And as a result, I got my first faculty position. I used to think about it in those terms. Ebola is a really important, virus to work on. It's killed a lot of people. It causes a horrible disease. And I can tell you in molecular detail how that works. It is something that scared the hell out of me. And that's why I actually got into it. It's pretty cliched for a virologist of my age, but I read The Hot Zone. It scared the shit out of me. So I decided I was going to work on viruses. I used to think about it just like that. But now you're right. I never imagined that I would be in this position. I used to think that I can bitch about stuff. I'm like kind of political for a scientist, but I did not understand how really closely and intrinsically related science is to actually these political decisions and how science is being used right now to inflict massive harm and suffering and actually to undermine our democracy altogether. And to me, I was raised in the US. I'm very jingoistic, even during the Olympics, even under Trump, I can't help but be like USA person. I'm all about fighter jets and fireworks and all that shit. So to me, it just seems like a no-brainer that I have to use my expertise to defend my country effectively and to serve my country and to prevent what I see also, Steve, as a tremendous evil. To me, I was raised Catholic, but I think that this is more than that. It's a human value that good people don't want to see people die horribly for no reason. And to me, it's just as simple as that. I know Ebola virus disease is a horrible, horrible disease, and I don't think people should have to die from it if we could prevent that. And we used to be able to prevent that. We can't prevent the viruses from spilling over. They're out there, but we can prevent how they are going to affect our population. We can prevent them from causing mass death. We know how to do this with Ebola, and we've chosen not to do it.
Mm. What is that? If you could statistically put into what that lack of empathy has meant in removing any support to not just contact trace, but to vaccinate and to contain these Ebola outbreaks. Can you statistically put a number to that right now,
Yeah.
specifically in the Congo, Uganda? Because I would love to know what that is. Because statistically, this matters.
Yeah, and so a lot of these numbers are still moving because there's a lot of problems with reporting and documenting these impacts. But some studies have come out so far. So there's basically everybody in the US, every US taxpayer was paying about $36 a year towards USAID. This covers all of USAID's programs, not just Ebola vaccine, Ebola response outbreaks. I would say that the vast majority of it has been HIV treatment in sub-Saharan Africa, and so far they've tallied that in the hundreds of thousands of deaths, preventable HIV infections. That number will climb into the millions for sure. Some of these other programs, other NGOs, and it's a complicated situation, have tried to fill in the blanks, providing childhood vaccines. Gavi, for example, has provided a lot of these vaccines, but RFK Jr. has said that we can't fund Gavi because we have a deficit to correct or something. And I don't know how that's been resolved or if it has. So some of the backups to this have actually been fucked with too. So we're really in a situation where we can't really fully measure this number, but we do know that it's in the hundreds of thousands or millions, depending on what we're talking about. Now with Ebola, it's actually still a pretty rare disease. You're not going to have millions of people dying from Ebola. But the West African outbreak, by contrast, had more than 11,000 people that died of Ebola, and it started multiple Ebola outbreaks after that because Ebola can persist in survivors and be sexually transmitted and start new outbreaks years down the road. So surveillance and vaccination are really important for controlling this long term. We've gotten rid of those programs too. So it's not even just the thousands of people who will be affected by that one Ebola outbreak. It's actually many more people who will be affected by the downstream consequences of that. And then lastly, I would just say that whether we can put a precise number on all of these deaths or not, we can certainly begin to estimate economic costs as well. The thing that I think is hardest to estimate is the impact that this is going to have on the US's standing in the world. The US is basically saying, like, fuck you, we don't care if thousands of you die horribly. And I think that Americans really need to understand the impact that's going to have on foreign policy, on our standing in the world, and on ultimately our national security.
It's a astounding thing when you think about those AIDS deaths. I knew the person very well who is responsible more than any other person for convincing George W. Bush to push forward the PEPFAR, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief in Africa, which has saved an astounding number of
millions
lives in the 20 some odd millions from the AIDS virus. And Mike Gerson, like his friend and other colleague Pete Wehner, were committed evangelical Christians. And Mike Gerson's faith instructed him in the Oval Office to say to another evangelical Christian, the President of the United States, is we have the power to do this. Right. And basically, long story short, is the president asked Mike Gerson how many people could be saved. And Gerson's response was all of them. All of them.
It's true.
And it is a enormous American achievement that has been undone in this moment, supported by a different strain of evangelicism than the one that produced it, that I would say is antithetical to the teachings of Christ. Brian, how there's nothing that can make people, I think, go more quickly cynical than the cruelty of people dispensing it with a little tiny cross on their chest. How do you think about all that?
I agree. I think that evangelicals in America, the failure to confront Trump on this issue and many others will be an indictment on the evangelical movement in America for generations to come, and it will be a deserved indictment. Unfortunately, yeah, the pews in many ways are emptying. People that are coming back are often coming back because they're looking for that MAGA version of Christianity. And that is sad. However, I do believe sometimes things need to die to rise again. I know many Christians who are actively pursuing justice for marginalized communities all over the place. And I do think that, at least the way I see it, a truer form of the gospel will shine ever brighter on a dark landscape like the one that we're facing. When you see so much hypocrisy, that it does actually seem all the more powerful. When, for instance, someone like James Tallarico really making a splash on the political scene because he's talking about faith in a way that is so different from what we're seeing from MAGA Christianity, and that feels a lot more like Jesus. And people can see that authenticity when you are actually putting humanity first, people first, the flourishing of people first, not just the superiority of my tribe, my kind. That's not what God talk is supposed to do. When we speak of God, it should not be othering people. It should not be putting down people. It shouldn't lead to mass death. It should be knitting us together for the flourishing of everybody. And I do think that there is still a longing for that. I don't think that America has become a less spiritual place. And so I do anticipate that on the other side of this, other forms of Christianity that are more true to the spirit of Christ will be more palatable. But yeah, like you said, evangelicalism has mud on its face, and I don't think they're going to recover very easily.
I mean, I don't see how they could, because scientifically, like, this seems to me to be antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. If you're going to look at what Jesus wrote in the Gospels, and I was raised Catholic, so I'm not the most observant Catholic, but I do know the Gospels pretty well. I mean, if you look at it like a protocol, and you look at every time Jesus healed somebody as essentially a case report, like it's the New England Journal of Medicine or something, there is a pretty consistent pattern of behavior with what Jesus did. And as a Christian, at least the way that I was raised in the Catholic faith, you are taught that, like, pretty much Jesus is like the ultimate authority, right? So if you're confused about something, you should look and see what Jesus said or did about it. And I just don't see Jesus, cutting USAID funding to deprive millions of people of their HIV medications.
And to your point, Jesus's healings were not just medical healings. They were also social healings. So in almost every one of the healing stories, Jesus didn't just find the sickest person. They were also almost always socially ostracized.
Right.
And so those healings went to marginalized people and restored them to health and to community, reminding us not just that people deserve to be fed, people deserve to be healed, but that we are all a part of this together. And that really was behind so much of Jesus's healings and behind programs like USAID. And so I do hope that we find our conscience as a nation moving forward.
And that whole element is so important too, because there's a huge stigma associated with Ebola. There has historically been a huge stigma associated with HIV. Programs like PEPFAR, actually, which I think is probably, it should be George W. Bush's greatest achievement. It should be talked about all the time because it was so successful. Those types of programs are what we've just chosen to abandon. And I think that there's absolutely nothing in any kind of Christian theology that is approached in good faith that supports anything besides essentially what Jesus did to, as you said, not only heal people, but also heal the social stigma that was associated with being sick.
Wow. It's amazing how, and it takes someone with a mind like Steve to kind of bring all of this together into the funnel to see, that what that lack of empathy isn't just doing to the reputation in the United States, the misrepresentation of an entire faith of people that we all used to think were here to be missionaries, to feed the poor, the sick, the hungry, the weak, but the real life consequences that are happening right now in terms of Ebola outbreak, in terms of just how, pardon the language, fucking mean It is. And to wrap that meanness in the faith and the ideology of people who have hope, specifically in those marginalized communities. It's truly amazing listening to both of you and Steve, really weave this whole thing together in a way that it tells a completely different story about what the Trump regime and what this group of arseholes have tried to do to the United States of America, indirectly to the rest of the world. Just the selfishness, the lack of self-awareness, and the complete misrepresentation of entire groups of people that are currently having deadly consequences around the world as America prevents anybody from coming into the United States to achieve some kind of result, to experience what America is. And so I want to thank Brian for being here, for putting that into perspective to us. Brian Recker, of course, he's a public theologian, speaker, writer on Christian spirituality, Beyond Fear and Exclusion, former son of a Baptist preacher, deconstructed his entire faith. And man, I love talking to people like Brian. Brian gives me some perspective on where I came from and that there are better people than what we're seeing right now. He's also the author of Hellbent. Was in the room for the Epstein filibuster. Brian, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. That's Brian Recker. And of course, Ange, virologist, chief science officer. I can't get away from that. I don't think I will.
I mean, I like it. It sounds like I'm on the Starship Enterprise or something.
On a Starship.
Yeah.
Starship,
but she is also an infectious disease expert, and with the Save America movement has been doing just some incredible work. Would encourage everybody to follow her on the Save America site at the Save America Movement here on Substack. You can also go to the SaveAmericaMovement.org, and please donate if you can. It's what keeps these conversations top of mind of the work of people who are trying to bring America back to itself. And can't thank you enough, Ange, and give her a follow. Rasmussen Retorts.
Yes.
Retorts. Rasmussen Retorts. And I nailed the last name. Totally
You
crushed it
did.
this
You
time.
nailed it. The only one today who did. Thank you, Dean.
You're very welcome. Ange, thanks so much for your time.
I think I said it correctly.
No, you said Rasmussen. That's
Yeah,
what
you said
Rasmussen.
you've still got a little bit of the umlaut. You've been talking to Mary Corcoran too much. She refuses to learn how to pronounce my name correctly.
It's an indictment of your character, Steve. You didn't take time to learn the phonetic saying. Rasmussen.
Rasmussen.
We've had a long show today, but it's Memorial Day weekend, and I just wanted to talk about that for a second. About the million Americans. There's only been 700 million of us who've ever lived in the 250 years of our independence, which means roughly now at this anniversary of our independence, about half of us who have ever been are alive right now. So 1 million of us have given what Abraham Lincoln described as the last full measure of devotion. The bloodiest war in the history of the country was the Civil War. 405,000 Americans were killed in the war against Hitlerism. Dean, you and I took a walk on the National Mall. We went down to that memorial. I've stood in the American cemetery and in the Canadian cemetery in Benny-sur-Mer in the last year in Normandy, France. And one of the features of the American military cemeteries is that they are all over the world, and they are American territory. As Colin Powell pointed out, it's the only territory we have ever asked for was to bury our dead. But we did not fight wars of conquest or wars of taking, as is the case now as Trump seeks mineral deals and everything else. And so the graves in the cemetery in Normandy, for example, they all face west, back towards home in perfect symmetry. An army silently and permanently at rest. There's an author named Rick Atkinson, a Pulitzer Prize winner, who wrote a wonderful series of books called the Liberation Trilogy. And they're about the American and Allied war effort across Western Europe from 1942 to 1945. And I'm going to read an excerpt from how that final book, The Guns at Last Light, ends. And it was the most moving ending of any book ending that I've ever read. And honestly, it's the only nonfiction book I've ever read that I finished with a tear in my eye. It was so poignant. He's also the author of The Fate of the Day and the trilogy of the American Revolution. I recommend it highly. He's the author of a book about the West Point class of 1966. I think as far as historical authors go in this era, he is a literary version of Ken Burns. I esteem him immensely. And this is how his last book ends as we head into this Memorial Day weekend. 75,000 Americans had been listed as missing or captured during the European campaign. Thousands still were not accounted for at war's end, leaving their loved ones with the particular anguish of uncertainty. Darling, come to me in a dream tonight and tell me that you're alive and safe, Myra Strackner had written from the Bronx on April 18th after Private First Class Bernie Stoller went missing. Please, I want you to tell me. Private Stoller's secret eventually would be out. He had been killed by a German artillery a month earlier at age 19. For others, the mystery endured. An estimated 25,000 GIs lay in isolated graves around the continent, many of them hidden or lost. No sooner had the ink dried on the surrender documents than mobile teams fanned out across Europe to seek the dead and missing, including 14,000 Americans believed killed in air crashes behind enemy lines and others who had died in German prison hospitals. Similar searches began from the Arctic Circle to Cape Town, from the Azores to Iran. Graves registration units labor to confirm the identities of more than 250,000 Americans dead in 450 cemeteries scattered across 86 countries, 2/3 of them in Europe or the Mediterranean. For an estimated 44,000 lost at sea, nothing could be done. Within weeks, 700 bodies were disinterred in Czechoslovakia. Hundreds more emerged from scattered graves in eastern Germany, where the Soviets grudgingly permitted 3 American recovery squads to roam the countryside. 1,300 sets of American remains were unearthed in the Low Countries, many from Market Garden boulders. Millions of landmines made tromping around the Hurtgen Forest and the Siegfried Line perilous, but a 9-month hunt throughout Western Germany would find 6,220 Americans on battlefields large and small. In 3 years, European fields, forests, orchards, and cellars would yield 16,548 isolated GI dead. Over the subsequent decades, they would continue to give up a skull here or a femur there. Even as this search began, all 12 U.S. military cemeteries on German soil were empty. No dead GI would knowingly be left in the former Reich. By the thousands and then by the tens of thousands, the dead were reinterred at 38 temporary sites, mostly in France, of which 10 eventually became permanent American cemeteries. The solicitude according them could be seen at the 9th Army Cemetery in Meergarten, where on May 30th, 1945, Memorial Day, Dutch citizens gathered flowers from 60 villages and spread them like a brilliant quilt across 17,000 graves. The power of a well-wrote grave was beyond measure. Patricia O'Malley was a year old when her father, Richard James O'Malley, was a battalion commander in the 12th Infantry, was killed by a sniper in Normandy, later wrote of seeing his headstone for the first time in the cemetery at Colville above Omaha Beach. Quote, I cried for the joy of being there and the sadness of my father's death. I cried for all the times I needed a father and never had one. I cried for all the words I had wanted to say and wanted to hear but had not. I cried and cried. In 1947, the next of kin of 270,000 identifiable American dead buried overseas would submit Quartermaster General form 3:45 to choose whether they wanted their soldier brought back to the United States or left interred with comrades abroad. More than 60% of the dead worldwide would return home at an average cost to the government of $546 per body, an unprecedented repatriation that only an affluent, victorious nation could afford. In Europe, the exhumations began that July. Every grave was opened by hand and the remains sprinkled with an embalming compound of formaldehyde, aluminum chloride, plaster of Paris, wood powder, and clay. Wrapped in a blanket, each body was then laid on a pillow in a metal casket lined with rayon satin. Labor strikes in the United States caused a shortage of casket steel, and reparation was further delayed by a dearth of licensed embalmers, although government representatives made recruiting visits to mortician schools around the country. In warehouses at Cherbourg, Cardiff, and elsewhere, the dead accumulated. Finally, the Joseph Connolly, the first of 21 ghost ships to sail from Europe, steamed down the Scheldt with 5,060 dead soldiers in her hold. 30,000 Belgians bade them adieu from the Antwerp docks, while pledging to look after the 61,000 Americans who would remain in those 10 European cemeteries as if one man vowed their tombs were our children's. On Saturday, October 26, the Connolly berthed in New York. Stevedores winched the caskets from the ship, 2 at a time, in specially designed slings. Most then traveled by rail in a great diaspora across the Republic for burial in their hometowns. Among those waiting was Henry A. Wright, a widower who lived on a farm in southwestern Missouri near Springfield. One by one, his dead sons arrived at the local train station. Sergeant Frank Wright, killed on Christmas Eve, 1944 in the Bulge. Then Private Harold Wright, who had died of his wounds in a German prison camp on 3 February 1945. And finally, Private Elton Wright, killed in Germany on 25 April, 2 weeks before the war ended. Gray and stooped, the elder Wright watched as the caskets were carried into the rustic bedroom where each boy had been born. Neighbors kept vigil overnight, carpeting the floor with roses, and in the morning they bore the brothers to Hilltop Cemetery for burial side by side beneath an iron sky. Thus did the fallen return from Europe, 82,357 strong. We should think about that. We should think about Kash Patel snorkeling above the USS Arizona. And we should think about the many desecrations of our war dead by Donald Trump. And we should think about the desecrations of his Victory Arch. And we should think about the desecrations of his ruined White House. And we should think about the war dead killed in an unnecessary adventure in Iran this weekend.
Mm-hmm. And that is a perfect way to end Dead Air, brought to you by the Save America movement. Steve, thank you for that reminder, and thank you for recentering all of us this weekend. Really appreciate it. I want to thank Dr. Angela Rasmussen for joining us as well. Rasmussen Retorts on Substack. Thank Brian Recker again for joining us to break a lot of this down. And, of course, thank you, Steve. At Steve Schmidt is where you can find Steve. There's no one better. There's no one that has the ability to offer that kind of perspective through that lens of history on the planet. And grateful for you as a friend, grateful for you, grateful to know you as a friend, and grateful to see the patriotism in you come out in such an eloquent way that so many people can get reacquainted with the purpose of what that American dream really is. And what was sacrificed and how it's being toxically stained by one Donald Trump and his regime. So I want to thank you, Steve. And I want to thank our friends at the Save America movement for making this possible. Again, it is always a good time to go and join the team, a team of people who don't fight for culture. They fight for what is right and what is wrong. TheSaveAmericaMovement.org. Please go there today. Please donate. Please become a member. Join the resistance. And again, please subscribe. TheSaveAmericaMovement.org, or you can get them here at the Save America Movement on Substack. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Try to remember what's right, and we'll be back with Dead Air next week. Have a great day. Thank you.